Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series as we focus on meeting the lawyer bencher candidates. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone. They don't reflect me, Justice and Pieces, Trias College, any of the other education institutions or organizations I'm affiliated with. And today we have Stephanie joining us. So, Stephanie, maybe we can start. Thanks, first of all, for joining us here. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. This is a great opportunity. So I'm a condo and multi-residential housing lawyer practicing in Kitchener. What that means is that I advise condos, community associations, life lease community on governance matters, help them with disputes, whether it's litigation, mediation, etc. And I also do a fair amount of solicitor type work for them. So I'm kind of a bridge between litigation and solicitor. And in terms of why I'm running for Venture, I've been watching convocation pretty closely in the last 4 years since the last election. I'm very proud to be a lawyer. I'm very proud to be part of the legal profession. I am not proud of the conduct that has taken place in convocation over the last 4 years, particularly on the part of the full stop slate or then the stop stop slate. Um, not only did the conduct kind of interfere with any kind of advancement or progression on the mandates of the Law Society, but it inhibited even the ability to do day-to-day functions of convocation. And I'm embarrassed of that. And I think, as many of others have said, if that continues, we're going to lose self-regulation. That's not something I want to see.
Now, in terms of whether it's certainly we have very low as of the last election at least, and hopefully it changes voter turnout. And I have students who may not be privy to kind of what you were just talking about. Maybe you can kind of sort of elaborate a little, or perhaps provide an example of kind of what you witnessed in convocation the last 4 years that sort of specifically kind of led to you running this time around.
Yeah. Well, this is an example that was, I mean, I knew of it happening, and then Sid Choister has talked about it because it was his experience as part of, the finance committee. They had come together, they had created a budget. There was unanimous approval by the committee to bring it forward to convocation for voting, unanimous. And then when it was time for convocation to vote on it, the slate themselves unanimously within themselves voted against it, even though there were members of the committee who were part of the Stop Stop slate who had voted to approve it in committee. And that's the kind of thing, I mean, how do so the budget committee finance committee had no idea that that was going to happen. They were not, I mean, obviously they dealt with, the issues that were raised, but having that kind of back and forth and not committing to the purposes of convocation and rather just the very specific positions of the slate. That's just one example of how they really impacted the ability of convocation to do its business.
Now, in response to that, the Good Governance Coalition has been created, and as I've talked with some of your coalition members yesterday and today, that kind of creates this. I think of this. I don't know if you're familiar. There's Spider-Man meme where they're both pointing at each other, and it's saying, "Well, slates are bad, but our slate is good, and then if we're elected, we're going to get rid of slates." Kind of, like sort of kind of like a dictatorship for life type of thing. Like our slate is better than others. So kind of how would you reconcile all of that and saying, hey, we are not being hypocritical by coming together as a slate or as a coalition, and how would that kind of function sort of during the elections and then at convocation if elected?
Yeah, I think one really important difference is that none of us want to have to be part of a coalition. We all wish that this were not necessary. But because of what happened at the last election, with the vote splitting and all of the slate getting, I mean, there were what, just over 16,000 lawyers who voted in the last election. I think around the max votes that anyone received, including the slate, was around 5,000. They didn't get voted in by the majority of lawyers. They got voted in because the vote was split, but all of the full stop slate folks got the same essentially amount of votes. That's what we don't want to see happen again. But the other big difference is that we do not vote as a block, or we will not if elected. We don't all agree on issues. I think, I watched Will's interview with you, and he's very correct. There are many issues on which we disagree. We have emails back and forth within the group. Um, but it's always respectful and it's interesting discussion and oh, I didn't think about that point, and oh, maybe you might want to consider this, right? It's not disrespectful, it's not aggressive, it's just differing opinions. And I think that's really important. We're not committed, there's no mandates for how we have to believe, other than that we have to generally agree that equity and diversity is a good thing, and is an important thing for convocation and the Law Society, to be aware of and acknowledge and focus on.
Now, with that, I mean, you brought up equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I've talked to some of the paralegal bencher candidates that say let's scrap that altogether. And on the Full Stop website, there they have the "Stop Creep, Stop Bloat, Stop Woke" phrase there in terms of what they would be doing if elected. So, what would you say in response to that? Right? Is equity, diversity, and inclusion needed as part of the governance of the Law Society? Not necessarily, we can still be doing it, but not as mandated hours, or perhaps explain kind of the response there if the Full Stop group was elected, and what that could potentially do in terms of our governance in the Law Society.
Yeah. So one of the things that the Law Society is mandated to do is, access to justice. And you can't have access to justice unless you recognize that there are systemic barriers to access to justice for certain types of minority groups. The other thing that the Full Stop slate acknowledges as the responsibility is, competence and licensing of licensees. But how can you say that a licensee is competent if they don't have cultural competence? A really good example is I have a colleague who works quite a bit with the Mennonite community, and he does litigation, but he also knows enough about the community to know that Mennonites don't like to go to court. They do not like conflict, so they will settle if at all possible. So he knows, going into meetings with his clients, he knows to approach it from that perspective. Court is not going to be an option. We just need to figure out how to settle this. If he was going in trying to insist on court, he wouldn't be getting anywhere, and he wouldn't be helping his clients. He wouldn't be acting in their best interest.
So, with that in mind, in terms of the vision that the Good Governance Coalition has, and as you pointed out, Andrew and yourself and everyone else have their own specifics that they'd like to do. Could maybe expand on what are some of those things that are important to you in this election that you'd like to focus on if you're elected?
Law libraries are a big one. I know others have spoken about this, but it is something that I'm quite, I think is quite important. Um, because law libraries, they have so many resources. Again, everyone's acknowledging that competence, professional competence, is a thing that the LSO needs to be responsible for and be involved in. Law libraries and the resources that they have play a huge role in that. The CPDs that they offer, books and et cetera that they provide. And there are so many lawyers out there, especially sole practitioners and small firms, who are not able to access those resources on their own. So if funding is reduced to law libraries, that will directly impact professional competence. And when they talk about, oh, the Law Foundation could fund it instead. Well, the Law Foundation funds, legal aid and so many other important um, programs, and it also doesn't have the money to fund fully law libraries as they are now. So even if Law Foundation dismissed everything else that it did and just funded law libraries, they would still lose a significant amount of funding.
Now, in terms of the libraries there, and the position could also be on the other side that, well, could these be funded, well, they're not through a law foundation, through membership fees, or I mean, things are going more virtual, we're talking virtually, like, is there still that need as there may have been 10, 15 years ago? And what would you say sort of in response to that?
I would say talk to the law librarians and see how busy they are, because they're all busy. They all are used on a regular basis, you know, their knowledge, their assistance. They're having lawyers and paralegals in on a regular basis, constant daily basis, to use the resources there. So I certainly don't think that a lot is happening virtually, and that's great, but it's certainly by no means all virtual. It is still very much required to be in person.
Now, besides the law libraries, there's again a number of other issues there. Any from either the vision there or the platform, uh, any other ones that you'd highlight that are also important for you if elected?
Yeah. A big one for me is the equity and diversity part. You know, I am a member of a few different minority groups. I'm a woman, obviously. I'd love to see gender parity at convocation. I'm also a member of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, and I am someone who deals with mental health issues and ADHD, right? So I have disability, and I've been very open about those facts. It took me a long time to find a place in the legal profession where I felt comfortable being open about those things, you know, where I was comfortable at work, especially doing that. I'm lucky to have found a place that where I can be open and that works with me and accommodates me. But not everyone has that. Many people don't have that. And many people are coming into the legal profession not sure if they're ever going to be able to find that. And I think we need to make sure, you know, both within our profession and within the larger public, that we're acknowledging all those different groups and how important they are, you know, to the profession and to our larger society.
Right. So again, the woke or stop woke kind of terminology, or I've had people that essentially say that I think someone gave the analogy that if you have a kid and they have a messy room and you tell them clean up your room, they're not going to clean it up, but if you don't tell them, and eventually they'll notice it's messy, and it'll be cleaned. So I guess the analogy is kind of like mandating hours or mandating things is problematic rather than perhaps that the issue is not there. I mean, again, what should the law studies role be in equity, diversity, inclusion, whether it's CPD hours, whether it's more than that. So, they certainly put on events every month for the respective uh, groups, right? What can the law study be doing, and what should the law study be doing?
I think mandating CPD really is important because there are people out there who absolutely, I mean, maybe even with the CPD, they're not going to get it, but they're at least a lot more likely to get it if they have to watch these programs. I've been in meetings with, you know, senior counsel and other and law partners where they've made racist remarks, homophobic remarks, you know, just very unacceptable comments because they didn't know that that was going to be a problem for me, or they didn't care that that was going to be a problem for me. There are many people in our legal profession who need that education. But there's also, you know, continued funding and support for things like legal aid and diversity programs and research into, you know, different ways that we can better represent the public. I think there are a lot of ways that the LSO can and should be involved in that.
Yeah, because I mean, I guess it's not just obviously ourselves, but we're dealing with a very diverse public, and that
Yes.
as you pointed out, the example there of in the Mennonite community in Waterloo or Listowel or whereabouts there, that it's not just about knowing the law, but knowing being culturally competent and trauma informed lawyering and such. But you know, is CPDs sort of just a starting point, but because again whatever the hour or 2 hours you have to do, is that not going to kind of get to the roots of maybe the ignorant or misguided beliefs that people have? So is there anything else that can be done so within that framework?
I mean, I hope so. I think that the absolute bare minimum is those couple hours of EDI that's required. Um, you know, I think that there does need, I mean, we've all agreed, the coalition, each individually, the candidates have said we're not bringing back statement of principles. It was divisive, it didn't accomplish what was desired, we're not bringing that back. But there are certainly other ways that we can mandate that licensees, you know, are involved or, you know, take steps to become aware of, you know, racial issues in our system, all sorts of, discrimination against people with disabilities. Um, I don't know exactly what that is, but I know we need to look into it. We need to figure out how to do a better job of that because right now, like I said, we're doing the absolute bare minimum, and I don't think we're representing the public fully and properly if we're just doing the bare minimum.
Now, so if there's anything else, I know certainly there's plenty of things within, if elected, but we've addressed those two main points there. Anything else that you can think of if you're elected that you'd like to see be done differently over the next 4 years, as opposed to what you said you're embarrassed about that happened in the last 4 years?
I'd really like us to get back to, the word's been bandied around, but civility. I would really like to get back convocation to get back to civil functioning, the ability to just do the jobs that it needs to do, to focus on making this profession even better and improving, our programs and our representation, and our encouraging of students to be engaged and involved in things because they're the new lawyers, they're the new generation, they're important. I just want to see us get back to just doing what convocation is supposed to do and not bickering and having political, you know, issues come into play in it.
So for the last couple of questions here, so I have students that are listening that they're not going to be voting, or not at least in this bencher election, but again, as they look to get into the profession, and we've talked certainly about things with your colleagues about articling and some of the barriers that are there, especially for those minority and disadvantaged groups. But any advice that you would have, any words of wisdom as they look to get into our profession and grow within our profession?
Yeah, find your place, and it's going to be hard. And the best way to do that, or one really good way to do that, is to make connections. Um, because every connection that you make is going to be a possible opportunity in the future. So if you're somewhere where you're not happy, where you don't fit, that's not because of you, it's because it's just not the right place for you. There's going to be somewhere out there for you. And talk to your network, talk to your connections, and figure out where that is, what you want to be doing, who you want to be doing that with, because it's important. You have to be happy and love what you're doing. You can't just love the law. You have to love, people that you work with and the clients and your colleagues.
And final question here, Stephanie. Essentially, the question of the day is, why should the lawyers that are going to cast their vote, including myself, cast it for you and for the Good Governance Coalition members?
Yeah, and it's most important to vote for the coalition as a whole, again, because of the vote splitting. But I think what it comes down to me is I don't want us to lose self-regulation. I don't want us to continue to devolve. Um, I want, like I said earlier, I'm proud of this profession. I'm proud to be a part of it. But I think the coalition, each candidate, even though we may disagree on certain issues, we are committed to certain basic values of making this profession better, of respecting each other, of respecting all of the different people within our profession and public. And we just want to get back to doing the work that convocation is supposed to be doing.
Perfect. So thanks again for taking the time and joining us. Thanks for everyone for listening. Take care.
Thank you.